The story begins with a forgotten archive box discovered in 1998 by a Polish historian named Dr. Marek Jaskulski. While researching wartime agriculture, he noticed a folder mislabeled as routine farmland documentation. Inside it, he found something entirely different: military dispatches, damaged radio transcripts, and a partially burned field report marked as top secret. These documents describe the disappearance of the 241st Infantry Battalion of the German Army, known as the Rügenwald Division. According to the records, the battalion entered a forest in late 1944 and vanished without a trace. The final radio message recorded from them contained only a short sentence: "The forest is moving." The forest in question was Rügenwald, a dense region near the Eastern Front. It had no reputation for being tactically dangerous. There were no known minefields, no active battle zones, and no major wildlife threats. However, local residents believed the forest had unusual qualities. Travelers often reported that compasses behaved unpredictably and that echoes seemed to come from directions inconsistent with their own movements. Villagers referred to it as the Whispering Woods. Despite these local legends, the battalion entered the area with routine expectations. Captain Heinrich Falk led three soldiers who were ordered to cross the forest to approach Soviet lines from the flank. Strategically, the mission was simple and should have taken 2 days. The battalion's first daily report mentioned nothing more than fog, poor visibility, and navigation tools drifting slightly. The second report was far more unusual. A field journal noted that trees seemed to change positions when the soldiers looked away and back again, as if the forest layout was subtly shifting without explanation. During the first night, a runner from the rear column reported seeing lantern-like lights inside the fog. He couldn't identify their source and insisted the lights didn't resemble German or Soviet equipment. Scouts were sent to investigate but found no evidence of movement and no indication that anyone else was nearby. The final written report from that night described faint, whispering sounds echoing between the trees, even though no other units were present. The battalion made one last broadcast at dawn. After that point, all communication ceased. The 241st Infantry Battalion of Rügenwald was never seen again. When the 241st Battalion stopped responding, German command initially assumed equipment failure. Radio issues were common in forested regions, so no alarm was raised for the first 24 hours. But when the battalion missed 2 scheduled check-ins, a small reconnaissance squad was sent to locate them. The squad reported that the entrance to Rügenwald Forest looked undisturbed. There were fresh boot prints, cart tracks, and signs of a large group entering, but no indication of a struggle or sudden retreat. The trail led a full kilometer into the forest before the tracks began to break apart and scatter strangely. Some tracks continued forward, others veered off to the sides, and several overlapped in directions inconsistent with a uniform marching column. One scout wrote in his log that the tracks seemed to reorganize themselves, as if the soil had been disturbed multiple times by different patterns of movement. The squad followed the most consistent trail deeper into the forest, but after another kilometer, the footprints simply ended. The path ahead was clear of any freeze marks, drag marks, or combat signs. It appeared as if the battalion had stopped walking and then vanished. The reconnaissance squad attempted to use compasses to confirm their location, but the needles wobbled unpredictably. Even the backup compasses remained unstable. They tried to confirm position using the tree line, but several scouts argued that certain trees appeared in different locations than they remembered on the way in. This disagreement was dismissed as confusion due to the fog, which had thickened to the point of reducing visibility significantly. The squad returned to report the strange disappearance. A larger search unit of 80 men was dispatched the next day. They were instructed to move slowly, mark trees with paint, and report any irregularities. They proceeded along the same route the battalion had taken, retracing the earlier footprints. As with the previous group, the tracks led deeper into Rügenwald and then abruptly stopped in an open clearing. In the center of the clearing, they found a single object, a broken field radio with its wires torn out, but with no signs of struggle or battle damage. The device showed no burn marks or bullet hits, suggesting someone had disabled it manually. Nearby, searchers discovered remnants of a German ration pack that appeared untouched. There were no signs of eating, no discarded wrappers, and no human remains. The clearing itself was unusually quiet. Wildlife tracks were absent and even insects were sparse. A medical officer later described the silence as abnormal for any forest in wartime or peacetime. The search team marked every tree in the area to ensure they could find their way back, but when they attempted to return to the forest entrance, they noticed that several of their marks were missing, while others appeared in different places than they remembered painting them. Despite this, the squad eventually returned to the forest edge safely. Their report stated that Rügenwald showed unpredictable environmental behavior and recommended halting all further missions through the region until proper investigation could be conducted. High Command dismissed the report as field exaggeration and assumed the battalion had deserted, been ambushed, or taken prisoner. No record of enemy engagement existed in that area, yet the official explanation remained that the soldiers likely fled or were captured. But the disappearance of overpowered seasoned troops without a single shot fired was difficult to accept, and the forest itself became a point of quiet suspicion among officers who read the full report. The file was sealed that same winter and buried among unrelated documents. Its contents would not be reopened for over 50 years. Months after the disappearance, German command halted all operations near Rügenwald, but the forest was surrounded by several small villages, and local residents had seen unusual activity in the days before and after the battalion vanished. When investigators later reviewed civilian accounts, they found several consistent patterns. One farmer who lived less than a kilometer from the forest edge claimed he heard faint metallic sounds coming from inside the woods, light tapping as if tools were being struck together. He stated that the rhythm resembled military engineering work, but when he went to investigate, the noise stopped abruptly and did not return. Another villager, an elderly woman named Eliza Corner, reported seeing a long line of dim lights inside the trees during the night of the disappearance. She described them as lanterns moving in a perfectly straight column. According to her statement, the lights progressed into the forest and then faded, one by one, until only darkness remained. She insisted that the lights did not behave like torches or campfires, and she was sure the soldiers carried electric lamps, not open flames. Her report mentioned a detail that later matched the battalion's final logged message. She said the lights appeared to shift with the trees, as if both were moving in unison. A third testimony came from a local hunter who often tracked animals around the forest edge. He told military investigators that during the week following the disappearance, the forest interior seemed unusually empty. He found no animal droppings, no fresh tracks, and no signs of deer, boar, or wolves. For a forest known for its wildlife, the absence was unusual. He believed the ecosystem had been disturbed by something he could not identify. When asked if he saw soldiers, the hunter recalled spotting what looked like uniformed silhouettes standing between the trees at dusk. But when he moved closer for a clearer view, the silhouettes appeared to dissolve into the fog. He admitted that the conditions were difficult and visibility was low, so he could not confirm whether he had seen men or shadows. Despite the villagers' consistent and detailed observations, German officials dismissed all testimony as unreliable. The army could not afford to entertain unexplained phenomena in the middle of a war. Officially, the villagers' statements were recorded but ignored, and the disappearance was attributed to desertion or enemy capture. However, decades later, Dr. Jaskulski noted that 6 separate civilians, interviewed at different times and locations, gave remarkably similar descriptions. Strange lights, shifting trees, and the sudden absence of forest life. This consistency led him to believe the battalion may have encountered something more complex than disorientation or combat. It suggested that the forest environment itself was behaving abnormally during the period of their disappearance. One final testimony stood out above all others. A railway worker claimed he saw a lone German soldier emerge from the forest 3 days after the battalion vanished. The man was disoriented, covered in mud, and walking with an uneven gait. Before the worker could speak to him, the soldier stumbled back toward the tree line and disappeared inside the fog. No body was ever found, and no soldier was reported returning to camp during those days. This sighting was the only hint that anyone may have escaped. But without a name, identity, or body, the testimony remained an unsolved fragment in a growing mystery. In the spring of 1945, months after the battalion had vanished, retreating German forces abandoned several supply depots near the outskirts of Rügenwald. When Soviet troops entered the area, they collected leftover documents, weapons, and personal belongings. Most of these items were catalogued and shipped east for intelligence analysis. Among these materials was a damaged field rucksack containing a partially intact notebook. The cover was burned at the edges, and several pages were missing, but one detail caught the attention of Soviet analysts. The name written inside belonged to Sergeant Otto Rehm, a member of the lost 201st Infantry Battalion. At the time, the Soviets assumed the notebook had been dropped during retreat. They did not know it might be the only surviving first-hand record of the battalion's final days. The journal was archived under general war logs and forgotten for decades until Dr. Jaskulski reviewed it in 2000. The first entries were routine, weather notes, rations, and minor troop concerns, but the writing changed drastically after the battalion entered Rügenwald. The entries became shorter, fragmented, and increasingly focused on the environment. One early entry stated, "Compass unreliable. Forest path repeats. Landmarks inconsistent." Another entry described strange silence. "Birds absent, no animal sounds, men uneasy." Further pages suggested increasing disorientation. Sergeant Rehm wrote that several soldiers claimed they saw figures moving between the trees at dusk. These figures reportedly matched the outlines of German uniforms, but when approached, they disappeared. Rehm noted that it became difficult to tell whether these sightings were real or the result of stress and fog. One entry mentioned a peculiar incident near a split oak tree. A group of soldiers marked it to track their route, but when they returned to the same spot hours later, the mark had faded almost entirely, as if absorbed by the bark. He wrote that another soldier marked the tree again using a knife, yet the next day the carved initials appeared shallower than before. Rema also described a growing tension within the battalion. Several men argued that the forest's layout was shifting subtly throughout the day. Others believed the battalion was walking in circles despite clear evidence that they had advanced deeper. A lieutenant attempted to establish a fixed base point, but by the next morning, the area appeared different from the previous night. A particularly unsettling entry near the end of the journal read, "Lights in the fog, evenly spaced, moving in a line, not ours." The final legible page contained only a few lines. The handwriting was shaky, and some words were smeared by water damage. It read, "Voices ahead. Not sure if men or echo. Trees feel closer. Cannot see complete path anymore. Something is wrong with the forest." There were no further entries. The journal abruptly ended, offering no explanation of what happened next. This notebook became the most significant piece of evidence suggesting that the battalion was not simply ambushed or lost. It indicated that the soldiers experienced consistent, unexplained environmental changes inside the forest over a short period. Jaskulski concluded that Rem's final entries were written not in panic, but in confusion, as if the environment itself was altering faster than the battalion could comprehend. The journal raised more questions than answers, but it confirmed one thing. Whatever happened to the 241st Battalion began before they realized they were in danger. The deeper the team pushed into the bunker system, the more the structure changed. What started as concrete corridors soon shifted into reinforced steel hallways, built far beyond anything necessary for wartime defense. The walls were lined with thick cables, humming faintly, as if still connected to a dormant power source waiting to be awakened. At the end of a narrow passage, Richter found a symbol painted beside a locked metal door, a black sun surrounded by runic markings. It was the same symbol from Kasdorf's bunker, repeated with unsettling precision. This time, however, fresh scratch marks surrounded it, as if someone had tried desperately to carve their way out, not in. Richter forced the door open. A gust of stale air escaped, carrying the metallic scent of rust and something else, something like preserved chemicals. Lights flickered on, revealing a chamber filled with steel cylinders arranged in rows. Each cylinder was tall enough to hold a man, sealed with thick glass panels. Inside each, floating in a pale solution, were mannequins shaped like human bodies. Except they weren't mannequins. Their skin was too detailed, their faces too lifelike. Every hair, every pore, every detail had been preserved perfectly. They looked like soldiers suspended in time, untouched by decades. Mara examined one closely and noticed a number plate on its base. Project Vi, Subject Fort. The logbooks scattered nearby revealed that these were failed attempts, the early prototypes of a program intended to create soldiers capable of enduring extreme environments. But the logs ended abruptly, with the final page describing unexpected cellular reactions and loss of control over test behavior. Before anyone could comment further, a distant metal clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the complex. Not from behind them, but ahead. Something was moving in the bunker. Richter motioned silently, and the team followed the sound through another corridor. The noise grew louder, metal scraping, steady, deliberate. The hallway opened into a massive chamber. In its center stood a circular platform surrounded by broken machinery and smashed glass pods. One of the pods had shattered recently. Its glass shards were still wet with fluid. On the floor were footprints, not dusty or aged, fresh. The team followed them to the far side of the chamber, where the footprints stopped abruptly at a wall. Not a dead end, more like a hidden door. Richter pressed his palm against it, and the wall slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside was a small room containing a single metal chair. Shackles dangled from its armrests. A recording device sat on a table, miraculously intact. Mara pressed play. Static crackled, followed by a trembling voice. German, weary and strained. This is Dr. Heinrich Wöhler. The final entry. The project has failed. Subject Zero has escaped containment. He is stronger than predicted, faster than predicted. I am sealing this wing of the facility. If you find this message, leave. Subject Zero is still here. The recording ended abruptly with a crash, followed by a single chilling growl. The room went silent. Richter stepped back, scanning the shadows. The team had no idea how long ago the recording had been made. Days, months, or recently. As they turned to leave, the overhead lights flickered again. But this time, they didn't return fully. Instead, a single light at the end of the corridor began to pulse slowly, as though responding to something moving between the beams. The footsteps they heard next were heavy, deliberate, not human. And they were getting closer. The emergency lights glowed dim red along the bunker walls, guiding the team deeper into the underground maze. Richter ordered everyone to conserve light, using flashlights only when necessary. The air felt heavier now, filled with dust released from the creature's destruction of the central machinery. Mara checked her map again. There's one sector we haven't reached yet, Sector H. The access point should be somewhere near the generator room. Nikolai scanned the walls until he found a small recessed panel. A faded metal plate above it read, H Corridor, Autorisata Persona Nur. He wiped away the grime and pulled the lever. The panel creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway descending at a sharp angle. The temperature dropped the moment they stepped inside. The walls were lined with thick, insulated cables and pipes. Some were still warm, suggesting the systems had been functional until Subject Zero disabled everything. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. Halfway through the corridor, Mara's flashlight beam caught something unusual. A row of metal claws etched into the wall, not scratches, perfectly straight, evenly spaced grooves, as if something had been secured here with immense force. Nikolai examined them more closely. Restraints, he said. Whatever they kept down here wasn't meant to move freely. They reached the bottom of the ramp and entered a vast chamber. Unlike the other rooms, this one was untouched, clean, organized, meticulously preserved despite decades of abandonment. There were rows of sealed glass pods, each large enough to fit a person. Thick frost covered the surface of every pod except one at the far end, where the glass was shattered inward. The metal frame was bent, twisted outward as though something had forced its way out with overwhelming strength. Richter approached the nearest intact pod and wiped away the frost. Inside was a figure wearing a tattered undershirt, eyes closed, skin pale. Electrodes were attached to its temples, chest, and arms. It looked human, almost normal, yet unnaturally still. Mara joined him. These aren't soldiers, they're prototypes. She pointed to a clipboard hanging beside the pod. The paper had yellowed, but the writing remained legible. It was a list of designations. Prototype 0, activated. Prototype 1, non-responsive. Prototype 2, instable. Prototype 3, lethality, uncontrolled. Prototype 4, neural failure. Prototype 11, terminated. Richter exhaled slowly. 0 was the only successful one. Nikolai moved toward the shattered pod at the far end. The nameplate was missing, torn from the metal mount. The only remaining marking was a symbol burned deep into the frame, 2 intersecting circles. A logo. Not the German eagle, not any known military insignia. Something else entirely. He crouched to examine the fragments of glass on the floor. They were scattered outward. Whatever was inside had forced its way out with violent speed and surprising precision. Then he found something else. A trail of footprints leading away from the broken pod and disappearing into a maintenance duct at the back of the room. Not Zero's footprints. These were smaller, lighter, and faster, fresh enough to disturb the frost on the floor. There's another one, Nikolai said quietly. Another prototype survived. Richter, Mara, and the soldiers gathered around the duct. It was just large enough for a person to crawl through. Faint metal shavings suggested something had scraped against the edges recently. Mara turned to Richter. If 0 wanted us gone, this one might not. Before anyone could respond, a metallic clatter echoed through the ductwork. The team raised their weapons, scanning the vents. The sound repeated, fast, frantic, moving deeper underground. Nikolai followed the noise with his flashlight. It's heading toward the old ventilation shafts. Those link to every sector. Richter understood immediately. If it reaches the exterior vents, it won't just escape, it'll be loose in the mountains. The thought hung heavy in the cold air. Mara tightened her gear. Then we go after it. Richter nodded. The team moved toward the maintenance access door. Behind them, the room full of frost-covered prototypes remained in silent rows. Proof of an experiment far larger than any of them expected. And now, two of those creations were awake. One had warned them to leave. The other was already running. The team entered the maintenance tunnels, moving in a narrow line through the tight metal passageway. The walls vibrated with the faint echo of something moving ahead of them, fast, scraping through the ducts with sharp, uneven motions. It was clear from the metallic rhythm that the surviving prototype was agile and familiar with the layout of the bunker. The tunnel split into three directions. Mara unfolded the schematic she had recovered earlier. The ventilation network branches from here. Left leads toward the fuel storage hall. Center goes straight to the service elevators. Right leads to the surface vents. Richter examined the floors with his flashlight. A thin trail of frost had been disturbed on the right-hand path. It's heading up. Nikolai switched to his climbing gear. If it reaches the surface vents, it'll get outside. That thing is smaller and faster than Zero. It will vanish into the mountains. The team chose the right tunnel and advanced deeper. The passageway gradually slanted upward, becoming steeper with each step. Cold air began to flow from above, thin, sharp, and unfiltered. They were approaching the outer ventilation shafts. Halfway up the incline, they found the first sign of the creature, a handprint on the metal wall. Thin fingers, abnormally long, pressed deep into the steel as though gripping it while climbing. The imprint was fresh. Mara observed it carefully. This one wasn't built for brute strength like Zero. It's built for speed and precision. The tunnel ended at a circular hatch bolted into the ceiling. Faint moonlight shone through the vents above, casting pale beams into the chamber. The air was colder here, mixed with the scent of snow. They were close to the surface. Before Richter could open the hatch, a sharp metallic clatter sounded from above. A single echoing strike. The creature was still in the ventilation tower, only meters ahead. Nikolai climbed the ladder first, while the others covered him. As he reached the top of the shaft, he paused and scanned the interior. The prototype was perched halfway up the vent tower, clinging to the metal like an insect. Its back was turned. The figure was thin and wiry, wearing a torn white uniform. Its skin was pale and smooth, almost reflective in the moonlight. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't hiding. It was listening. Every movement of the team sent faint vibrations through the metal walls. The creature reacted to each one, tilting its head with slow, deliberate precision. Nikolai whispered down the shaft. It hears everything. Richter joined him at the top and motioned for the team to stay quiet. He slowly reached for a tranquilizing charge stored on his vest. It wasn't designed for creatures like Zero, but this prototype seemed smaller and possibly vulnerable. The moment Richter's fingers brushed the device, the creature turned its head. Its face was human in shape, but hollow in expression, with dark eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished stone. It didn't snarl or attack. Instead, it tilted its head in a curious gesture, as if trying to understand who they were. Richter froze. Mara whispered from below, "What is it doing?" The creature suddenly shifted its weight and began climbing higher, but instead of escaping through the top vent cover, it pressed its hand against the metal grating and tapped lightly. One tap. Pause. Two taps. A pattern. Richter recognized it from the recovered notes in the lab. The prototypes communicated with their handlers through coded taps. This one wasn't trying to escape. It was sending a signal. Mara climbed up just enough to see. It's trying to activate something. Nikolai looked up the shaft. The emergency vent shutters. If it overrides them... The creature tapped the pattern again, faster this time. Richter reached for his tranquilizer. "We stop it now." Before he could fire, the metal beneath their feet trembled. Deep inside the shaft, a motor activated. A heavy mechanism began moving.
The summer. Oh,
Prototype had triggered the override. High above, the ventilation shutters began to unlock. The creature looked down at them, head tilted once more, then climbed rapidly toward the opening. Richter shouted, "It's going for the surface! Move!" The team rushed upward as cold night air poured into the shaft. The final shutter clicked open with a thundering metal snap. By the time they reached the top, the creature was gone. Only footprints in the snow led away from the bunker, disappearing into the darkness of the mountains. The team climbed out of the ventilation shaft and stood on the surface. The bunker's concrete roof was covered in a thin layer of snow, untouched except for the trail of footprints leading west into the forested mountains. The night sky was clear, lit only by the moon and the distant silhouettes of pine trees swaying in the wind. Richter examined the footprints closely. They were light, precise, and spaced far apart, as if the prototype moved with unusual agility. Each impression was deep only at the toes, suggesting it pushed off with powerful, controlled speed. Nikolai followed the tracks with his flashlight. "It's moving quickly, but it's not trying to hide. It wants us to follow." Mara scanned the tree line with her binoculars. "Prototype Zero tried to keep us away from this place. This one is doing the opposite." The tracks led toward a narrow path between two steep ridges. Snow had collected in the gap, forming a long white corridor. The team moved quietly, their boots crunching softly under the frozen ground. Every sound echoed against the rock walls. Halfway through the pass, they found the first sign that the creature had stopped. A small metal object lay in the snow, flat, rectangular, and covered in frost. Mara picked it up carefully. It was a key card. The same type used inside the lab's restricted sectors. Nikolai knelt beside her. "It wants to show us something." The tracks continued through the corridor and into a cluster of tall pine trees. As they entered the forest, the wind died down. The branches overhead blocked the moonlight, creating long shadows between the trunks. The footprints became more erratic, circling the trees, pausing at certain roots, then darting forward again. It looked as though the prototype had been studying the terrain. Richter whispered, "It's choosing a place. For what? I don't know." A few meters ahead, the track stopped abruptly at the base of a large fallen tree. The trunk was split open, hollowed by age. Snow filled the interior cavity. Nikolai inspected the hollow carefully. No sign of the creature. Then Mara noticed something else. A series of thin metal rods, partially buried in the snow around the log. Cables ran between them, exposed only at the tips. She cleared away the snow to reveal a small device attached to one of the rods. It was a sensor. Old, rusted, and identical to the ones used in the bunker's earliest experiments. Richter examined the placement. These were installed here decades ago, before the prototypes escaped. They were monitoring something in this forest. Nikolai brushed snow off the fallen tree and uncovered a metal plate bolted into the bark. The plate had numbers engraved into it, coordinates. He read them aloud. "This is a marker. The scientists used this tree as a field observation point." Mara looked around the forest. Which means Prototype Zero wasn't the only one that left the facility. Others must have been released or escaped years before the war ended. Before anyone could respond, a faint sound echoed from deeper in the forest. A soft tap. Then another. The same coded rhythm the creature used inside the vent shaft. Richter raised his fist, signaling the team to stay still. The tapping grew clearer, deliberate, patterned, repeating from tree to tree. It wasn't random. It was guiding them, moving through the shadows with intention. Nikolai whispered. It's leading us somewhere. The team followed the sound deeper into the forest. The tapping moved steadily ahead of them, always just out of sight, but unmistakable. As they advanced, the trees grew denser, their trunks darker and thicker. Snow clung to the branches like wet cloth, muffling every noise. Finally, they stepped into a clearing. At the center stood a massive pine, older and wider than any tree in the forest. Its bark was scarred with deep, horizontal grooves, years of markings layered on top of each other. Mara approached it slowly. These aren't animal scratches. They're deliberate. Nikolai pointed to the lower section of the bark. Small metal plates, long rusted, were embedded beneath it. Coordinates, dates, experiment numbers. This was the primary field observation point, he said. Everything they studied centered here. Richter stepped closer to the tree and noticed something at the base. A single footprint. Fresh, deeper than the others. And beside it, a symbol drawn into the snow. The same intersecting circles burned into the shattered pod. The sign of the prototypes. Before the team could analyze it further, a soft movement sounded behind them. Snow fell from a branch. A dark figure shifted between the trees. The prototype was watching. Not attacking. Not escaping. Not hiding. Watching. Something about this place mattered to it. Richter raised his flashlight, but the figure slipped back into the forest with silent, fluid motion. The tapping resumed, now faint, descending into the distance. The creature was leading them deeper still, towards something older than the bunker, older than the experiments, something that the scientists had discovered but never explained. The forest around them felt heavier, as though they were no longer alone in it. The team moved cautiously toward the direction of the fading taps. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close around them. The pines grew taller and thicker, their branches woven so tightly that moonlight barely penetrated through. The air felt heavier, still, almost insulated from the rest of the world. Mara reviewed the map again. This area isn't supposed to exist. It's not on any military survey. Richter kept his voice low. The scientists must have erased it. They hid something here long before the bunker was abandoned. The tapping reappeared. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The same pattern the prototype had used earlier. It echoed from ahead, guiding them to the far end of the forest. The team followed it, stepping carefully across the snow-covered ground. After several minutes, Nikolai raised his hand. There! Beyond a cluster of tangled tree roots, a circular stone structure jutted out of the ground. It was half buried beneath moss and snow. Thick vines had wrapped around it, but the shape was unmistakable, a perfectly symmetrical ring of stones arranged like a collapsed well. Richter approached the structure and brushed away snow. Symbols were carved into the stones, lines, arcs, and intersecting circles. Not military, not modern. Mara examined them with her flashlight. These markings match the ones found on the lower levels of the bunker. The scientists didn't create this, they copied it. Nikolai circled the structure slowly. This predates the war, maybe by centuries. The tapping returned, this time from inside the stone ring. Richter motioned for silence. The team formed a perimeter around the structure. The sound was coming from below, echoing through a deep chamber hidden within the earth. Mara knelt and shone her light into the gap between the stones. There's a hollow space under this, an entire chamber. Richter stepped back. This could be the source of their research. The prototypes, the signals, everything. It started here. Before anyone could discuss a plan, the snow shifted. A figure stood at the far edge of the clearing. The prototype. It didn't approach. It didn't hide. It simply stood still, observing the team from the shadows. Its face remained expressionless, its posture calm. Its hands were relaxed at its sides, as though waiting for them to understand something. Richter spoke evenly. "Why bring us here?" The creature didn't respond. Instead, it tapped its fingers lightly against its leg. 4 taps, pause, 1 tap. A different pattern. Mara recognized it instantly. That's the same code found on the lab papers. It means origin. Nikolai pointed to the stone structure. The scientists didn't discover Zero first. They discovered this place, and whatever they found here led to the creation of the prototypes. Richter approached the creature slowly. "What came from down there?" The prototype didn't move. Its eyes shifted toward the stone ring again. Then it stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the trees. It didn't flee. It didn't rush away. It simply walked backward until the darkness swallowed it completely. The tapping continued faintly in the distance, growing softer and softer until it faded entirely. The team stood alone on the clearing. Silence settled over the forest. Mara spoke first. "It wanted us to find this chamber. It wanted us to know where everything began." Nikolai knelt beside the stone ring and traced the carvings with his glove. "This wasn't built by the scientists. They only studied it. Something much older was here before the facility, something they tried to replicate." Richter looked around the clearing, then at the hollow structure beneath them. "We'll uncover what's beneath. And then we'll understand what they were trying to create." The wind shifted, blowing snow across the ring of stones. The forest remained perfectly quiet. Whatever secret had been buried beneath this place was still waiting in the dark. And the prototypes, created in the image of something older, were not the end of the mystery. They were only the beginning. Richter ordered the team to set up a secure perimeter around the stone ring. Snow fell lightly, settling on the old carvings and the surrounding forest floor. The clearing felt unnaturally still, as though the entire area was holding its breath. Mara retrieved a compact, ground-penetrating scanner from her pack and activated it. The device hummed and cast a blue grid of light across the stone structure. After a moment, the screen revealed the unmistakable outline of a chamber below, wide, circular, and supported by stone pillars. In the center was a large shape, partially buried, too uniform to be natural. "There's something massive down there," Mara said. "Whatever it is, it's not part of the forest." Nikolai stepped back and examined the readings. "It's metal, dense and old, and there's a hollow space around it like a containment chamber." Richter circled the structure, studying the edges of the stone ring. "There must be an entrance. The prototypes didn't dig through rock. They came through something built for access." Mara walked around the perimeter until she found a depression in the snow, an odd rectangular shape near the base of the stones. She cleared it with her gloves, revealing a rusted metal hatch connected to a series of gears and latches. "Here," she said, "this is how they entered." The hatch was locked with a large mechanical bolt, frozen by years of weather. Nikolai wedged a crowbar beneath the handle and applied pressure. The bolt snapped free with a sharp crack, echoing through the trees. Richter and 2 soldiers helped lift the hatch. A column of cold, stagnant air rose from below, carrying the scent of stone, earth, and something faintly metallic. Beneath the hatch lay a narrow staircase carved into the ground. The steps descended into darkness. Richter switched on his flashlight. "We go down, stay close." The team entered the staircase, leaving the snowy clearing behind. The stone walls were old, older than anything they had seen in the bunker. The carvings along the walls matched the markings on the ring above, repeating in long spirals. Nikolai ran his hand across the engravings. The scientists didn't carve these. They discovered them. As they descended deeper, the temperature rose slightly. The air thickened, carrying a dry, mineral scent, as if untouched for centuries. The staircase opened into a wide chamber supported by stone pillars. At the center stood a massive metallic structure. It was cylindrical, covered in faded symbols identical to those on the prototype's pods. Heavy cables, old, frayed, and long inactive, connected the structure to panels in the stone walls. Everything was ancient, yet clearly engineered. Mara walked around it slowly. This isn't German. This isn't modern. This might not even be from this era. Nikolai approached what looked like a control console built directly into the stone. There were no buttons or switches, only depressions shaped into the rock, worn smooth by use. He pointed to faint markings beside them. These symbols matched the pod labels in the lab. The scientists copied their entire system from this machine. Richter examined the cylindrical structure. There was a horizontal seam along the center, sealed with corroded rivets. His flashlight reflected off faint scratches across the metal surface. As he stepped back, he noticed something else. A single footprint in the dust. Fresh. Small. Distinct. The prototype had been here recently. Mara moved her light across the floor. It didn't just lead us here. It accessed this chamber before we arrived. Nikolai knelt beside the footprint. It came down here but didn't disturb anything. It was looking for something. Richter shone his flashlight against the metal cylinder again and saw a handprint near the seam. Thin fingers, delicate, pressed against the surface. The same pattern they had seen in the ventilation shaft. The prototype had touched the structure. Mara stepped back. Richter, what if this machine predates all of their experiments? What if the prototypes were designed to interface with it? Before anyone could respond, a mechanical click echoed through the chamber. A small panel on the wall shifted. Dust fell as the panel slid open, revealing a narrow recess inside the stone. Inside the recess was a metal tablet, thin, rectangular, covered in symbols identical to the ones carved into the room. Nikolai retrieved it carefully. This is not German. This is part of the original structure. Richter examined the tablet. So the scientists weren't creating something new. They were trying to recreate something ancient. The chamber fell silent again, except for the faint hum still echoing through the metal cylinder, an energy that felt faintly alive, though dormant for years. Above them, faint and distant, a soft tapping echoed down the stairwell. The prototype was still nearby, watching, waiting, guiding them to something deeper. The team moved deeper into the forest, following the faint traces Hans had mentioned. The trees grew denser, and the air became colder, though no weather records suggested a temperature drop that night. The forest floor was strangely undisturbed, as if no unit of 200 men had ever marched through it. Minutes later, the team found a rusted metal canteen half buried under leaves. Its markings matched the battalion's supply list from 1943. Nearby, an old strip of cloth was tangled on a branch. Chemical tests showed aging consistent with wartime fabric, but ultraviolet scans revealed no environmental damage that should have occurred over 8 decades. The investigation led them toward a narrow valley. According to terrain analysis, the battalion had used this route to avoid detection. Drone imaging showed unusual track patterns, movements too synchronized, as if an entire column had passed through in a single file without breaking formation. A few meters ahead, the team discovered a collapsed wooden post. It carried a hand-carved sign. The language was German, but the carving style did not match any documented tools used by soldiers of the Hand Battalion. The wording warned of shifting ground and unnatural silence. The message appeared rushed and uneven, as if made by someone under pressure. As they moved into the valley, all digital equipment began experiencing interference. Cameras glitched, Audio devices picked up faint static resembling far-off voices. Some recordings captured fragments that sounded like marching boots, though no one in the team heard them at the time. The terrain sloped downward into an open clearing. At its center lay an old military helmet partially embedded in hardened soil. Radar scans showed more metal objects beneath the surface, but in impossible formations, gear arranged in patterns rather than scattered by decay or combat. When the soil was excavated, investigators found a line of rifles intentionally planted upright, their barrels pointed toward the sky. None of the weapons displayed damage from battle. Their positioning suggested a deliberate ritual rather than a field maneuver. The clearing contained no signs of bodies, camps, or struggle. It appeared as if the battalion had marched into the valley, halted here, and then vanished instantly. Further ahead, the path branched into two tunnels concealed by foliage. Old military maps did not record any tunnels in this region. Structural tests showed they were natural formations that could not have supported hundreds of soldiers passing through without collapse. The team split into two units. The first unit entered the left tunnel, discovering broken lantern pieces and footprints. The right tunnel led to a narrow chamber where a small rusted box lay, wedged between rocks. Inside was a notebook page with a list of names, each belonging to a missing soldier from the battalion. The handwriting did not match Hans's survivor statements. The ink was faded, but the preservation suggested it had not been exposed to air for decades. The list ended with a final line that translated to, "We followed the sound. Do not follow us." The discovery raised new questions about what the battalion had encountered. As both units regrouped, they realized the valley did not match its position on modern satellite maps. The coordinates differed slightly, as if the landscape had shifted over time. The team marked the location and began preparing for the next stage of the investigation. The team moved higher up the ridge, overlooking the valley, hoping to understand why the terrain showed conflicting coordinates. Geological sensors detected unusually strong magnetic fields concentrated around the center of the clearing. These distortions were not present anywhere else in the region. As the team surveyed the ridge, they discovered another anomaly. A tree trunk bore a carved date, 1943, the same year the battalion disappeared. Despite its age, the carving was clean and sharp, lacking the erosion expected after 8 decades. Tree ring analysis later confirmed that the mark was somehow newer than the tree itself. Near the carving, investigators found a rusted compass lying in the moss. When tested, the needle spun continuously, as if unable to identify a stable north. Other equipment also lost calibration when brought close to the ridge, suggesting a persistent field disturbance that remained unexplained. Farther along the ridge, they found a narrow stone ledge offering a view of both tunnels. From this angle, something became clear. The valley's layout formed an unnatural, geometric pattern. The tunnels, clearing, and the tree carvings lined up with near-perfect symmetry. Military engineers confirmed no wartime unit could have created such precise alignment without advanced tools. The team followed the ledge until they reached a sheltered alcove. Inside lay a damaged radio receiver coated in dirt. One of the engineers cleaned it carefully and discovered it still held fragments of recorded audio. The device should not have functioned after so many decades, yet the internal components showed minimal corrosion. When analyzed, the audio revealed faint transmissions, distorted, repetitive, and fading in and out. Some segments resembled unit roll calls from the missing battalion. Other parts contained unknown signals that did not match any military frequency band from the era. One short fragment repeated 3 times. "Keep moving. Do not look back." The source of the signal was impossible to identify. Its origin timestamp was also inconsistent. Some parts dated to 1943, others appeared to have no timestamp at all. As the team descended from the ridge, they discovered long scratch marks on a nearby rock surface. The marks formed parallel lines, similar to tally marks or tracking notations. Counting them revealed exactly 200, matching the number of missing soldiers. None of the scratches showed natural weathering. Before leaving the ridge, the team performed thermal scans of the valley. The scans revealed a heat signature deep below ground, elongated, narrow, and stretching far beyond the valley's boundaries. It resembled a tunnel or corridor buried under layers of rock, but no record indicated such a structure ever existed. The team prepared to investigate the subsurface anomaly next, marking the beginning of another phase in the search for the vanished battalion. The International Research Panel completed its final assessment 6 months after the last field inspection. Their compiled report examined every angle: geographic drift, magnetic anomalies, atmospheric irregularities, topographical instability, and structural cave systems beneath Rügenwald. Each discipline provided partial explanations for certain observations, but none could account for the full disappearance of several hundred soldiers or the altered objects discovered decades later. An engineering analysis of the compass found in the forest concluded that its distortion pattern did not match any known manufacturing defect or external magnetization. Instead, the compass needle carried a magnetically uneven signature, as if it had been exposed to a rapidly shifting magnetic field that changed direction multiple times in seconds. No natural phenomenon in that region could recreate the effect. Geologists presented subsurface scans that revealed several narrow tunnels beneath the forest. However, none were large enough to accommodate human movement, and no signs of collapse were recorded in 1944. The tunnels appeared to have been formed thousands of years prior and were structurally untouched during the wartime period. Their existence did not match the battalion's route or their final recorded positions. Biologists studied the samples of moss and bark collected near the area where the abandoned equipment had been found. Some of the growth rings on the bark showed irregular time gaps, as if the trees had undergone accelerated growth phases inconsistent with seasonal patterns. These anomalies were not harmful or toxic, but they showed evidence of inconsistent environmental stressors. The acoustics team investigated reports of echo distortion and voice redirection described in testimonies. Field tests showed that the forest's density and uneven terrain could produce limited echo anomalies, but not to the degree recorded in the wartime journal describing voices repeating from different directions simultaneously. The panel then examined the soldiers' final transmitted message: "The forest is moving." Their linguistics specialists studied handwriting samples from the captain and clarified that the phrase appeared in multiple notes, written separately by different individuals. The consistent wording indicated that it was not metaphorical or poetic. The writers recorded it as a direct observation. When the final report was compiled, the panel listed the disappearance of the 201st Infantry Battalion as an unresolved wartime anomaly. The documents concluded that while environmental factors may have caused disorientation, equipment failure, and route deviation, they could not address the scale and complete absence of remains. Their final statement declared the event historically unexplained. The sealed archive now contains all recovered evidence, analysis summaries, and personal accounts. It remains accessible only to accredited researchers. The case was officially classified under unexplained frontline loss, one of the very few wartime records with this designation. All contemporary investigations agree on one point: Rügenwald does not behave like a normal forest. The battalion's final disappearance remains without a complete scientific explanation, supported by physical evidence but lacking an identifiable cause.